Welcome back to the Plus Side of Nashville. My guest is Griffin, president of Musicians on Call, an organization that takes music to patients and families in healthcare facilities, and they get to witness its healing power. And before we went to the break, we were just talking about some of the many great stories and things that you've had to share, and also about how folks can volunteer, because I really feel like this is something that's sort of calling my name. How can someone volunteer for your organization, whether they have musical background or not?
Sure, and the great thing that we've done recently is we've moved the starting process for volunteering with us just to our website. So if you go to musiciansoncall.org/volunteer, that's where the process starts for everyone, whether you want to be a volunteer guide or a volunteer musician. And what happens when you go to that site is you fill out your application form, and then you go through basically our training, which happens online. So you learn more about what we do, you learn about how you need to behave and act in the hospital, what your roles and responsibilities are. After you do that, you have to complete a quiz to make sure that you've read it all and understand it. And then you go through a background check. Now, once you've been cleared through that, if you're a guide, what you'll likely have to do is then go to the hospital that you select you want to volunteer at and go through their training process as well, so that you understand the hospital that you're at. And as a musician, you'll have to submit music to us, because again, we want to make sure that all of our musicians are incredible musicians, providing great music for the patients. And then from there, as a musician, you'll decide whether or not you want to volunteer at a VA hospital, adult hospital, children's hospital, and then we start to schedule people. But it all starts online, so anyone can go to our website, musiciansoncall.org/volunteer, and start the process, and we'd love to have them.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
I know you have some celebrity volunteers in the past.
We do, and I think we get a lot of attention for that, because we are really the leading organization that brings these celebrity musicians to hospitals here in Nashville and across the country. But gosh, here in Nashville, we've got so much support from the country music community, and it really is a special genre of music, because it is so community focused, and the musicians really want to give back. We've had, almost everyone under the sun volunteer with us, from Keith Urban to Lady Antebellum to Kelsey Ballerini. You name it, we've had these folks.
Luke Bryan, I understand, has volunteered. Reba
supports us. Kelly Clarkson has always been a great supporter of ours. And speaking of Vanderbilt and Monroe Carroll Children's Hospital, we've gone a number of times with Kelly Clarkson to that children's hospital, and she'll be there for, last time I was with her, she was there for 5 hours, because she didn't want to leave the hospital until she spent time with every kid in the hospital. And we have these artists like that are so giving, and we're just so grateful to have their support. And one of the other musicians here locally that I absolutely love and has become such a huge champion for us is Charles Eston.
Oh yes, he was on the show Nashville for many years.
That's right.
I should say many years, but for several years. And he's just a great guy and who loves helping the community.
He does, and I've loved him back from when he was on Whose Line Is It Anyway? And The Office, and obviously on Nashville he was incredible, but he's really become an ambassador for not just Nashville, but for our programs as well. And it reminds me of one of the first times I was going with him room to room, and we were at the VA hospital in Nashville, and we walked into a room, and there's a gentleman there that was a World War II veteran. So obviously, he was certainly an older gentleman, and so we got in there, and he couldn't really communicate well, couldn't really remember stuff, and again, we don't know what the conditions that these patients are in. We don't ask, and we don't want to know, and we're just there to bring some happiness. And so we asked him a couple questions, what's your name, where are you from, and he just couldn't answer anything. And so Charles, knowing the music that he does, and he's really like a library of great country music, he said, well, I'm going to start playing some 1950s country music, because this might be some stuff that he knows. So he starts playing a song, and as he's playing, the gentleman starts to sing along and mouth the words to this song. Now, this is a guy who couldn't really remember his name in the beginning. After 2 or 3 more songs, this guy is sitting up and he's singing along to every single word of the songs. To the point where the nurses are now coming into the room with tears in their eyes, saying, he hasn't sat up on his own in 6 months, let alone, remembered this type of stuff. And so after Charles had finished playing with him, we said to him, well, how do you know all the words of these songs? And the guy said, now he was, the floodgates open, and he remembered everything. And he said, I was a native Nashvilleian, and I grew up here, and I served in the war, and when I came back, my job was to replace the records in jukeboxes in honky-tonks and saloons and restaurants all around Tennessee. So all day long he was driving around in his truck listening to these songs when you'd put them in the jukeboxes, and so that's how he knew all these songs. And this was a story that no one had ever heard, and certainly people didn't know that much about him to begin with.
Right.
But music has this way of opening this portal in people's minds that no medicine can do.
Exactly.
And when you see these miracles like this happen,
it just triggers these responses from people who otherwise would just sit there probably and not feel well or not respond in any way. But that story is one of the many that we hear from musicians on call. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how folks can get one of those fabulous T-shirts that you get, and also help this organization, this wonderful organization. So stay with us, and we'll be right back.